It's amazing that your story might begin with you, but it always ends with God. That it might start in tragedy, but everything that you face all ends with God receiving glory. I want to take 10 minutes, if you don't mind, and not to be dishonoring to time. And I know a lot of you are tired from the Bhangra last night at the Royal Show, so I don't want to keep you too long. Guilty faces. This month we're sharing about testimonies, and Yashiv kicked us off last week. Really nice. Well, before the month started. But we're sharing about testimonies, and each one of us here in this building has some story to say or to tell of the goodness of God. Every one of us here, in the littlest of ways, we are able to stand up and say, you know what, this is what God did for me at a certain point in my life. And we hear the story of Merce, and that's just one part of the story. And, we all have something to share. In 2020, at the end of 2020, I think Merce testified last week or the week before, but she was sharing about our financial battles. And at the end of 2020, after hitting that really difficult financial patch, I heard God say to me, just wait for the new year to come, and you'll see my provision. And just as it was, 2021, I had received a contract from another company that gave me work that sustained me for 8 months to the year. And I was grateful. And then we got back into that patch again at 2021, and I heard God say that again. You know what? I did it before. Watch me do it again. And just like He did 2022, here we are, and He's providing. And I know that you understand that as well. But being in Durban recently, we felt a bit out of place because we don't know people, opposed to being here. We have a lot of friends and family that, at just a drive down to the shop, you'll see somebody that you know. But being in Durban, we were at a space where, there's these two Maritzburgers that are now staying in Durban. We don't know anybody. And last week, the week before, we were invited to a connect time with one of the NCMI leaders called Greg Garrett. And he was visiting a One Life church in Durban. So they invited us. Mark, who's the lead elder there at One Life, he invited me and he said, Tim, won't you come and just connect with some of the guys that are there and listen to what Greg has to say? And I was like, okay. But I walked into that room and I felt so out of place because I'm like a Maritzburg boy that's there, just recently relocated. I don't know anybody. I felt a little bit alone and out of place. But here's God setting us up for victories in small ways, because in a room of 13 guys that were sitting there, 10 of them had my story. 10 of them had left Pietermaritzburg and relocated to Durban and are now supporting the ministry there. When you feel like you're at your loneliest points in life, God will put you in family. Because the Bible says He sets the lonely in family. When you feel that you're at the most difficult moments in life, He will bring people into your life that will encourage you on your journey. But today I want to share a little bit from Luke 15. If you got your Bibles, you can just open there. Maybe for the next 5 minutes, I want to go through a few things from a very famous story, the prodigal son. If you have it, say amen. Some of you are ruffling through the pages. It's just after Mark, which is just after Matthew. Okay, so Luke 15. Let's read this story quickly. I've entitled what I want to say today. Let me get the title correct before I take it out of my head. Tell God's side of your story. My message is tell God's side of your story. So Luke 15, let's read. It's the parable of the prodigal son. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me my share of the property that is coming to me. And he divided it between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had, took her on a journey to a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in the country, and he began to be in need. So he went, hired himself out to the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And there was a longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise, go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against you, against heaven, before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to the servants, "Bring quickly the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf. Kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive. Again, he was lost, now he is found." And they began to celebrate. Verse 25. Now his older brother, the son who was in the field, he came and he drew near to the house, and he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked, "What do these things mean?" And he said to him, "Your brother has come home. Your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound." But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, "Look, these many years I have served with you. I never disobeyed you or your commands. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." And he said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead and is now alive. He was lost, now he's found." So I want to say this morning, don't or tell God's side of your story. There is 4 sides to the story that I picked out. There might be more. There might be other ways in which you can interpret, but I see 4 different opinions of people in the story. The first thing I want to say to you is that at the start of the story, the son says, "Father, give me my share of property that is coming to me." Now, if you understood in Jewish custom, Jesus was sharing at that time with the Pharisees and those that were looking down on him and asking, who is this man that he calls himself God, that he can save sins? And they were questioning him. And Jewish custom, I believe, when it came to sons inheriting what their fathers own, when the fathers die, if there were 2 sons in the house, right, like Natty and I were at once, if there are 2 sons in the house, the father will make 3 shares of his property, of his wealth. He'll make 3 shares. He'll give 2 shares to the older son and 1 share to the younger son. And the same thing, if there were 3 sons, he'd make 4 shares. 2 of the shares go to the older son, and whatever's left will be split among the other 2. So here's the son that is asking for his inheritance prematurely because his father had not died and he wasn't rightfully the owner of that property by then. And he goes to his father and he says, "Dad, give me my share of what's due to me." And I want to submit to you today that do not ask God for something out of season. Do not ask God to bless you with something when it's not your season to receive that blessing. Because you can take an inheritance that's not meant for you at a certain time and you can squander it. There's another saying that the right thing done at the wrong time is a wrong thing. You may have the right intention about what you're doing something, but if you do it at the wrong time, the result is wrong. So if you have something in your life that you're trusting God for and you desire, ask God in the right time and the right season to give it to you. But there are 4 versions in the story that I want to quickly touch on. There's the son himself. His version of the story went something like this. Okay, I want my father's property that's coming to me. I want to go out, do whatever I want to do with it, squander it. And then at the end, he says, Father, I've messed up. I've sinned against you and heaven. Please accept me back. That's his version of the story. He's there asking for forgiveness. But he realizes that he has to pick himself up from that place where he was feeding pigs and he was desiring the pig's food. Sometimes God will take us through points in our lives, like Merce has just shown, where we have to desire pig's food in order to remind us what's back at home. Sometimes God will take us on a difficult path of desiring pig's food for us to remember what we left back at home. And the son comes with his side of the story and he picks himself up and he wants to go back home. Then there's one part in the story that I want to touch on, and this is the servant's side of the story. Now, I want you to listen to this because a lot of us tend to speak and give our version of other people's stories in a wrong way, in a way that could make you look at somebody else differently. Now, what am I saying? The son comes, the older son, he's hearing all the noise of his brother's return, and he calls one of the servants. The older son calls one of the servants and says, what's all of this racket? What's all of this noise that's happening? And the servant's response was, your brother's come back, your father's killed a fattened calf, and there's a party on. It's almost a very leading statement to the older son. Here's the son that messed up in life and has come back home and chose to come back to his father's house. And here's a servant that has the opportune moment to encourage the older brother and say to the older brother, you know what? Forget about the noise. Forget about the party. Your brother is back home. The one that was lost is back home. But he chooses in that moment to say, your father's killed the best and given to your brother that has come home. There are many times that we tell somebody else's story in the wrong way for us to look at people differently. So I want to encourage you today that when you're telling somebody else's story, Christians love to gossip. I have to say. Christians love to gossip. And sometimes we mask it with the most holiest face. Hey, we're concerned about this person. We're concerned about that person. I remember when we were younger at one point, there was a time in church, something was happening. Merce was sitting in the front. I was sitting at the back. I think I was listening out for something. I was assisting at the back. And a story went out in church. Hey, something's happening between those two. Again, Tim was sitting at the back of the church. Don't tell your version of somebody else's story. Don't play God in a moment when it's not your authority to play God. I want to encourage you that if you have an opportunity to see somebody come back who has lost, go and encourage them. Go and bring them in. Go and tell the family, you know what? The cow and the fattened calf and the ring and the robe is not the most important thing. We're not worried about the sacrifices that are made. We are worried about somebody that is being restored. That is the most important thing. So when you tell somebody else's story, tell God's version of the story, not your version of the story. The father received the son back into his house. He didn't say, son, you squandered everything that I gave to you. Son, you let me down. He didn't say that. He said, my son who was once dead is now alive. Who was once lost is now found. The father never picked on the mistakes of his son. The father had every right to bring his son into correction and say, you know what? You asked for your blessings prematurely. This is what you did. You went out and squandered it. Now you're back. Go and work the fields as a servant. But the father's side of the story was, my son is back. And that's all that matters to me. Bring the best. And then there's the older brother. The older brother mentality is quite sad if you ask me. You know, because Jesus said in John 8:35 that a servant leaves the house, but a son remains in the house. And the older brother was a son that remained in the house and didn't take on the identity of a slave that left the house like his younger brother did. The older brother remained as a son, but he was jealous and he was angry when his brother returned home. For us that have walked this journey long enough with God, I want to encourage you that when people come back to the fold and the lost is returned, don't be a bigger brother. Don't be the brother that will be angry to see people succeed before you. Last week we had a nice dig at Yeshiv. We were sitting at the table with the leaders, and so my father has said this thing now, my real father. He said now that he wants Yeshiv to be his shadow. And when he says shadow, Yeshiv is the person, if you don't know anything about my father, ask Yeshiv. He knows. Because the itinerary gets discussed with Yeshiv. And all of my dad's plans, Yeshiv is in the know. So he reminds him. And he's been doing an incredible job encouraging all of us. We know, he knows when we're preaching before we know we're preaching. So he'll send us a message, hey, don't forget you're on this. Now, if I had adopted the attitude of the older son in the story, I would have said, 34 years I'm living, my father never once called me a shadow. What a privilege to be Anthony Naidoo's shadow, you know? But you see, here's somebody that's coming up in life and in ministry, and there's a grace and a gifting in his life. I cannot be the person to stifle him. If anything, Yeshiv knows about a conversation that I had with him where I said, Yeshiv, I see you as my own brother, and I see you being like a real son to my dad. You know, I'm not here, and we shouldn't adopt the position of trying to stifle somebody else's growth, no matter who it is in church. If you see somebody that's new and has just recently come in and God is using them, don't sit back, fold your arms in jealousy and say, you know what, that should have been me. Support each other, love each other, build each other. This house will grow when we start to hold up each other's hands instead of tying it down, instead of picking on each other. So, 4 versions of one story. But remember, whatever you're going through, there are going to be many people that will have their version of your story. But tell God's version of your story. Don't allow people, and even like Mus, don't allow yourself to be condemned by yourself and by your story. But tell God's story and God's version of your story. Let's stand. I want to pray with you.